Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Development Control Committee meeting. My name's Councillor Andy McCormick. I'll be chairing the meeting. We'll just do a brief bits of housekeeping, and then I'll do a brief preamble, and then we'll start. Fire evacuation procedures for council meetings in the chamber. There are no fire alarms scheduled this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building as soon as you can via the nearest available exit. So there's one at the back there, and there's two behind me. Go downstairs, meet in the War Memorial Park. That's our muster point. Webcast of meetings. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet for your information. Mobile phones, I would politely request those in the meeting, please switch your mobile phones off or turn them to silence. Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee. Members are acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, not a political capacity. They will be using material considerations based in planning law to determine the decisions before us tonight. These will be referenced to the local plan policies, neighbourhood plans, and the national planning policy guidance. There will be, hopefully, a relatively smooth running of the meeting. Participants have 4 minutes. So without further ado, I think we're ready for the first item. Minutes. Sorry, I'm getting my head of myself. So, members, minutes of the first meeting for accuracy. Do we need to move a seconder?
Yeah, have it moved and seconded, please.
Yeah, moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded for Councillor Freeman. We all agreed. Oh, do we have any apologies for absence? I think we're all here, aren't we? And any declarations of interest? Okay. And there are no urgent matters. Right, okay. So, yeah, all those in favour, just for show for the minutes. That's carried. Okay, great. I shall sign these as a true record. Right, now I guess we're on for item number 1, which is White House, Bishopwood Lane, Balkhurst. And as I understand it, we don't have any objectors lined up to speak tonight. Do you want to have the officer presentation?
Yep.
Okay.
Item 1 is for the erection of a dwelling following the demolition of an existing B2 industrial unit at White House in Balkhurst. Looking at the update, there's just a change to a paragraph within the officer's report regarding the sill requirements. Nothing else to add within the updates, and the recommendation is for approval.
Okay, so if we don't have any objectors lined up, we have the agent. So that's Mr. Cobble, please, if you'd like to come up. So there's a couple of desks to his right, is that right? Yeah, that one's fine, yeah. So when you're ready, you have 4 minutes.
Found the right one. Thank you, Chair. Try and be nice and friendly today. Very strong officer report, which has been prepared for you. You'll all have read it. It explains why planning permission should be granted. And it only really needs repeating in context of responding to the third-party comments. So I'll focus on them. The starting point is, though, as you can see from these photos, it's previously developed land. It's got a B8 use for the applicant's business. It's been in the system, this application, for quite some time, and we've amended plans. We've provided more information on biodiversity, on turning and things like that as we've gone through. So we've got no consultation objections anyway, so highways, biodiversity, environmental health, emergency planner, etc. They're all fine with the application, no objections. More generally, the character of the area is residential as a mixture of house designs and sizes in the lane. And this includes new houses which have recently been built, one approved by the committee 2 or 3 years ago for a 3-bed house, and a second one at the entrance to the application site for a 4-bed house, which was approved earlier this year. Late last year. So an acceptance that development is acceptable in the area and off the lane. So it's fully occupied by the existing building. When I say that, I mean that the footprint covers the whole of the site. That will obviously be reduced, so the house will sit comfortably in the middle of the plot with the garden to the back and the parking to the front. A lot of the objections seem to confuse this application site with the neighbouring application site, which has been refused recently by the council, and this is the one where there are a few trees on it, etc. There are no trees on this because, as you can see, the building is over the whole site. So there's no reason why a new dwelling in an area characterised by dwellings won't be appropriate. Why it won't be appropriate. It will not generate any noise, of course. And there's no reason to believe that anything other than building works will result in a small amount of disturbance, but that's not a planning issue. Parish Council suggests overdevelopment of site, but I think a pretty simple response to that is that you look at the site-specific factors, you look at garden, you look at footprint, you look at parking, and if all of them comfortably fit on the site, then it's not overdevelopment. So I'll take that as the best indicator I can give you on that. So it's previously developed land. In principle, it's acceptable by being in the settlement boundary. There's no good reason to retain the existing building, which is of no visual importance. You've got your housing need to worry about, and therefore I hope you can endorse the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cobbold. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Cobbold? I see a couple of shaking heads there. Okay, we don't have any parish representatives lined up to speak. And thank you very much for your contribution. We don't have any borough councillors lined up to speak. Okay, questions for officers? Councillors Rattigan and...
I was wondering, on your update sheet it says there's no SIL payment. At what point can we change the council's charging schedule on that, and can we make a recommendation from this committee to charge a SIL on these homes? Can I get some answer on that?
That's done through I believe the local plan process and review of the local plan, the charging schedule, and it's totally separate to the Development Control Committee.
So we can make representations to the local plan update at that time, and then we can include SS6 or previously developed land within that, rather than have a nil payment.
Yeah, my understanding is that we can review the whole of the charging schedule. So, for example, at the moment we charge for extensions over 100 square metres, but not on a single dwelling. So, but that's all done on viability. There's various issues that you have to look at when you're considering the SIL charging schedule, but it's done totally separate to the planning process.
Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Just one observation. It says regard the impact on occupants' amenity, where it states on balance, and it's not a tilted balance, but on balance there's a shortfall of 0.5 of a metre on the garden, which is supposed to be 10. I'm just intrigued why that isn't a figure that cannot be challenged. I mean, would 9 metres be adequate, or how do you determine what is or isn't adequate?
The 10-metre guidance is guidance. It's not saying that every dwelling has to provide that, but members have to remember that there's obviously an existing building on there, so the footprint of the house is no larger or smaller than what's on there. But given the proposal that's in front of us and the guidance, that the rear garden depth is acceptable, and we couldn't refuse it on the garden being substandard.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the public observations on page 43, it says until recently the access from Bishopswood Lane was for only one house. Now there is to be an additional 3. And a bit further down it refers to a planning permission in 2018. Just wonder where exactly are these other developments, and has this been looked at as a cumulative effect rather than just looking at it in isolation, particularly with regard to what is a very, very narrow access?
If members can look at the visualiser, you can see the 2 arrows which indicate where dwellings have been approved within the lane. So there's one on the corner opposite St Anne's Cottage, and there's one opposite where the new dwelling is going, which is on one of the photographs earlier. Which I'm trying to find it. That's the dwelling. Oh, that's the dwelling opposite. That was recently approved, and then that's White Cottage. You can see in the distance. There's the other dwelling is obviously adjacent to the main road, which you can't see in that picture, but it's like I say, it's on the corner opposite St Anne's Cottage, which way, if you can see the red line, then St Anne's is on the left, and then the cottage is the other site for the dwelling is opposite, where it says 2102385 full one dwelling.
Any other questions? Councillor Durrant?
Did you all hear that? Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Obviously, given the ecological issues on the site, they had to submit, obviously, a preliminary roost assessment given the biodiversity implications. So it is that condition 7 is there to secure it, and part of that will be, the monitoring of that, and then the mitigation enhancements to ensure that they take place.
Any more questions? Debate? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very familiar with this particular lane and the site of the build that is existing at the moment. I believe the gentleman who owned it did something with vintage cars and sort of changed them into sort of a more modern format, and apparently only used it, only developed two a year. This development, it would seem to me, is going to mean a lot more traffic on the lane, which is very narrow. Members might be interested to know that the build at the top, which was mentioned by the case officer earlier, it has now been started. I think it's going to make egress from the site much more difficult, because it's the actual access or entrance is on a bend, which concerns me. The house opposite is a new build and has been there for about a year, I suppose. No, maybe more than a year, which also means more traffic on the lane. And then we've got a 3-bedroom house proposed. I was looking at the swept path diagrams this afternoon, and there's no way that you can get you can get 2 cars onto the site, into the parking space, in a forward direction, because you wouldn't want to reverse down that lane. Coming out onto the lane is somewhat difficult, I believe, particularly bearing in mind that the lane narrows just past the site and you get dog walkers, horse riders and all sorts of things coming down that particular lane. Unfortunately, I feel now, though, that because the owners of the light industrial site got a lawful development certificate back in 16, I think it was, I think the damage down there has already been done when you consider it in conjunction with the house which is being built opposite and the one that's got the permission at the top. So I'm just interested to hear what other people have got to say on this matter.
Did you want to say anything on that as case officer?
Obviously, just to refer, obviously, and as included within the officer's report, the local highway authority raises no issue with the proposal, and obviously members have to bear in mind the existing commercial use of the site in terms of traffic generation and the suitability of the access to gain the vehicles in and off that property, and there is an existing access which they're using which provides the 2 spaces for the proposed dwelling. So given that, it would be difficult to refuse it on highway safety issues.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to my colleague in my ward. I don't quite feel the same way, if I'm honest. The description of the site says it's generously set back. It has a lawful as commercial use with no restriction on how many vehicles can go in there and out. Although it has been used for a limited number of cars, there is no limit on what it could be even now. And therefore, in my view, the proposals for 1 3-bedroomed accommodation, taking away the commercial element that's there, I think will make it a residential area, not a mixed development. And therefore, I see no reason to not support the officer's recommendation, as long as the public right-of-way is protected, because I think we all need to know where we can walk and where we can enjoy the countryside. So I hope that will continue. But as it sits, I'm happy to move the recommendation on the basis of what's laid out in front of us.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I think what Councillor Rattigan has said, whilst the gentleman may have only been building 2 cars a year, his movements in and out of there to go to and from work could have been 2 or 3 workers going in the morning, coming out at lunchtime, going back in at lunchtime, going out in the evening. So there isn't necessarily any increase in traffic. So I second the proposal.
So it's been moved and seconded in favour of the recommendation. All those in favour, please show. Okay, and those against? And abstentions. Okay, right. That's carried. Right. Item number... yeah, can we record the decision? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
The application at the White House is approved, subject to the conditions within the officer's report.
Okay, item number 2, land adjoining Oxley's, Oxgrove, Burclere. And we have Mr. Patrick Smith lined up to speak. Hello, welcome to Development Control. If you... sorry, we need to have the officer introduction. You can take your seat and then we'll have the officer introduction. If you have the seat on the right there.
There's an application for a TDC application for the erection of a dwelling and a garage at Oxley's, following permission in principle having been granted at the site for a dwelling. There's nothing to report on the update and the recommendation is for approval. Thank you.
Okay, right, yes, Mr. Patrick Smith, welcome to DC. You have 4 minutes. There's a button on your right by the microphone. When you start, we'll count you down 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to make 3 points to you. Firstly, in relation to the contradictions in different planning applications. Secondly, the harm to the neighbouring heritage assets. And thirdly, the inappropriate scale of the plans brought forward. Planning in principle for this site was refused, but overturned on appeal because of the 5-year land supply issue and the fact that the neighbourhood plan, which opposes such development outside the settlement boundary, had not been made. The reason the neighbourhood plan was not made was that COVID delayed the referendum, which was subsequently passed by a near 80% majority. In the appeal, no reference is made to the significant harms that this application will lead to on land that is designated as a paddock. Also, there are a number of contradictions and inconsistencies in the consultee responses for the PIPs and technical detail application. This application references the wrong listed building on 3 separate occasions. A new PIP has been submitted for this site, and the Principal Conservation Officer has submitted an objection to this development in the latest PIP application following a site visit. I paraphrase his comments. It is considered that the erection of a dwelling in the proposed location would have an adverse impact on the settings of the adjacent listed buildings, as it would reduce the spacious distribution of residential development in this area and have an urbanising effect on the area. The proposal raises concerns relating to the impacts on the rural character of the area and a reduction of the amount of open space between buildings. These factors contribute to the setting of the adjacent Grade 2 listed buildings, Oxgrove House and the Malt House. As such, the proposals would result in less than substantial harm to the significance of the identified heritage assets. The proposed development would also conflict with policy EM11 of the local plan, which seeks to preserve or enhance the quality of the borough's heritage assets in a manner appropriate to their significance. The proposed development would also conflict with principle SHA01 of the Heritage Supplementary Planning Document. As such, the Historic Environment Team objects to the principle of development at the identified site due to the arising harm to the heritage assets. This contradicts the information in the officer's report before you for this application. The original PIP presented an indicative design which was a modest cottage style. This technical details application is bringing forward a property of around 5,000 square feet, necessitating a crown roof to accommodate its scale, all squeezed into half the plot due to a restrictive covenant on the other half. This is a clear case of planning creep and aggressive exploitation of planning. You'll have visited the site and seen how a paddock has already been significantly altered to make it look suitable as a building plot. The applicant told us that although this development could have been sited on the other side of the Oxleys house, which is a substantial property in the applicant's ownership, it would have impacted the value of their existing house much more, and thus they ignored the much reduced impacts this would have resulted on the neighbouring heritage assets. Without COVID, the appeal would not have overturned the refusal of the PIP. Now these plans introduce a scale of house that is way bigger than the indicative design in the PIP. It is against the Berkeley neighbourhood plan, and your historic environment team have highlighted the harm to heritage assets dating back to at least 1604. I urge you to use your powers as a Development Control Committee to stop this damaging development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions for Mr. Patrick Smith? Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Do we have Mr. Pettit and Mr. Carter? If you'd like to come forward. Welcome, Development Control. You've got 4 minutes between you. You've got buttons on the right-hand button to speak, and when you start speaking, we'll start the clock. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Sam Carter and I'm here this evening to address the committee on behalf of myself and my wife Claire. We've lived at Oxleys and Berkeley for almost 30 years, where it has been our much loved family home. Our 3 children all attended Berkeley Primary School, resulting in us in making many friends and being very much part of village life. Since submitting our TDC application for a single house with garage on this plot of nearly 1 acre, we have carefully considered the concerns initially raised by the Parish Council and local residents. This resulted in us reducing the footprint of the original house design by some 25%. Therefore, this house and garage footprint is now taking up less than 7% of the overall plot. The house position is now further away from the road and is being sited over 100 feet from our nearest neighbour on the other side of Wells Street, and as requested, the position of the garage has also been moved away from the road. The plot was always very well screened by hedges and trees, but over the last few years we have planted an additional 200 laurel and 550 beech hedgerow plants, as well as 14 silver birch trees around the edge of the site. We are ensuring that we are contributing to conservation and to maintaining the countryside setting and enhancing wildlife wherever possible, as well as minimising any change to the street scene. We are both retired, Claire having had a lifelong career as a midwife in the NHS, and myself as an engineer. So we have now reached a time in our lives where we both long for a new home which is warm, thermally efficient and much easier to maintain. We hope that you will support our application, and I will now pass you over to Mark Pettit from Fowler Architecture and Planning.
Thank you, Sam. Firstly, I would like to support the officer's recommendation to approve this application. The principle of a new home in this location has already been established following an appeal decision back in October 2020. The inspector agreed that the site was not in an isolated location, would not cause harm from a heritage point of view, and that the benefits of providing an additional new dwelling would significantly and demonstrably outweigh any adverse impacts. This is still the case. The house proportions are not considered significant, resulting in a property that will sit comfortably in this part of the village amongst other larger sized properties in similar sized plots. The applicants are committed to putting a house here that stands the test of time and that makes a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the area. A high quality palette of materials will be used, and the applicants are also committed to incorporating energy efficient measures as part of the development. There are no technical reasons why this application should not be approved. The Historic Environment team, landscape, highways, biodiversity, trees and environmental health have all raised no objections to this proposal.
1 minute.
The Parish Council are now happy with the proposals, and there have been several letters of support from members of the public to this scheme. The applicants have no objection to the conditions that have been suggested by the officer. These will secure, amongst other things, biodiversity enhancements, appropriate landscaping, tree protection, surface water drainage and sustainable water use schemes, as well as electric vehicle charging provision. In summary, the site is considered to be an appropriate location for a single dwelling, as confirmed already by the previous appeal inspector. Every effort has been made to ensure that the new house is sensitively designed and makes a positive contribution to the settlement. We agree with the officer that the house is a balanced design scheme which relates well to the context of the site and wider area. First floor windows on the side elevations will be serving bathrooms and en-suites and could be obscure glazed. As such, the amenity of neighbouring residents will not be unduly compromised, and the new dwelling will sit comfortably in its plot, being fully screened by established trees and hedgerows. It's also worth noting that the footprint of the house is the same as what was shown at PIP stage.
Could you sum up?
We therefore respectfully request that technical detail consent be granted in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the applicant or the agents? Okay. Oh, thank you very much for your contribution. We don't have any. Do we have any parish council representatives? No more speakers. Questions for officers? Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just clarification on page 67. The applicant has said the Parish Council does not object, but under heritage, it says it does object. It acknowledges that on the original PIP that some of those issues have been addressed, but that one still seems to be an issue for the Parish Council, although they're not here to make their claim.
On page 68 of the agenda, obviously, there's some amended comments from the parish, which state that obviously given the majority of the concerns have been addressed, they still have concerns about the size of the house proposed. So I suppose in effect that's still an objection.
Councillor Rettigan?
Yeah, you just confirm the two heritage sites that everyone's talking about.
It accidentally said Oxley's house rather than the Oxgrove house 3 times. I just read it, so it's the Mole house and the Oxgrove.
I thought it was more to do with the
No, it's incorrectly named. In the report it says Oxley's. Yeah, but it's Oxgrove. Yeah, we've just incorrectly done that.
So the correct reference is, the Oxgrove house, which is at the top right of the screen, and then the Malt house, which is to the south and opposite the proposed dwelling.
To the east, yeah.
So it's both are to the east, yeah.
Councillor Durrant?
Thank you, Chair. It's just an observation. I sort of overall, I like it. I don't know the area personally myself, but it strikes me that you've got quite a few entrances to properties on Oxgrove, and this one sort of comes out in the middle, in between two access points, one being Wells Street and the other one being some houses. It just struck me that an access off of Wells Street would have been better. It's not.
Do you have a question attached to that?
Probably not. No. Sorry about that. No. It was an observation. That was all. Apologies.
Any more questions? Any further questions? Debate? Councillor Robertson?
Thank you, Chair. The PIP on this was agreed at appeal. And it doesn't matter how much we hate that and disagree with that and would like it not to be so, that PIP is valid. So looking down the public observations, 90% of them are objecting to the principle of development, and you can't object to the principle of development because that has already been decided by the granting of the PIP. So we're stuck with it. So all we are actually looking at here is the building that is being put on it, is it in the right place? Is it of a sufficiently ridiculous size or design that we can refuse it? And the answer is quite clearly, no, it's not. It's not overdevelopment of the site. There's a restrictive covenant, but restrictive covenants have no basis in planning law. It's not anything we can consider. So, as I said, much as we hate it, because we don't like PIPs anyway, and it shouldn't have been granted as a PIP, we're stuck with it. So I move the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Miller?
I'll second that proposal, Chairman.
Councillor Court, do you have anything you want to contribute before we move to vote?
No, Chair, it was just to second the proposal.
Okay. Recommendation's been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please show. Those against? Abstentions? 1. Okay. So if we could have the decision.
The recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. Right, item number 3, parcel of land north of Plantation Cottage. If we could have the officer presentation.
This application concerns the erection of a timber agricultural storage building at land to the north of Plantation Cottage. There's nothing to report on the update, and the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. We have Elizabeth Bowden in support. Good evening, welcome to DC. When you start speaking, you'll have 4 minutes. The button's on your right with a microphone.
Thank you. This is an application for a small agricultural barn in an agricultural field which is connected to 1.4 acres of forest. Well, woods. Forest is probably a bit grand. The reality is it's a small agricultural personal venture. It's small-scale meat. It's us raising either sheep or pigs or cows over a short period of time to fatten them up to fill our freezer, or growing other things that we can consume ourselves. It's small scale, we'll make some hay. We also have a lot of wood that we need to process that you can probably see in the pictures, some 40 tonnes. The building that's proposed is some 13 by 5 metres. It's essentially a 3-bay garage with a wood store on the outside. The reason it's that size is because it allows us to have 1 bay to store materials and 2 bays, materials we need to lock away, and 2 bays to store hay or wood, and then another bay that's spare that we can put sheep in if we need to. It needs hard standing, so the wood can be up off the ground to dry, because it is predominantly pine that's come out of the small area of woodland. We have to get it to below 20% to be able to burn it. And the sheep, if there's anything wrong with them, they're better off on dry ground. In relation to the observations and objections that were put forward by people in the local area, a lot of them are to do with their fears that there's going to be a house built on that plot. And as the officer says in their recommendation to approve this, that's not a valid concern for this committee today. Taking the bullet points on page 95 down, the grass verges won't be ruined. It's my husband and I who attend there. We walk from our house, which is a mile away. The point of having a safe store on the site is so we don't need to drive there. There is a comment in relation to the standpipe that's there. We haven't put it all the way to where the barn location would be because it would be in the way of the building. There's a slight miscommunication between him and I about its exact location. It's further in than I asked, but these things happen. But it's going to be moved in due course. But it's not a standalone standpipe. It's attached to a water trough. The reality is that the officer supports the application strongly. There is seemingly no objection to it. And indeed, through her report, she says it complies with the various plans that it needs to, subject to some conditions that she put forward in relation to 1 through 4. We have no objections or concerns in relation to 1 through 4, but we do have a concern in relation to condition 5, which is put forward, which was news to us until this was published. In relation to condition 5, the requirement of it, this committee needs to go through and do the test that the National Planning Framework requires at paragraph 55 and run through that 6-stage test. Asking question 1 first, is it necessary? If we look at the reason that that condition is put forward, it says it's to allow the interests of visual amenity and in accordance with the policies EM1 and EM10 of the Basingstoke and Dean local plan. But the reality is, if you then look at page 96, she says there's no harm to the landscape. That's in the final paragraph. On page 96, she says specifically that it complies with and doesn't contravene EM1 and EM10. And on page 99, she says that the development is acceptable within the accords of the frameworks and the plans that you have to test. The next in those 6, number 4, it's not actually enforceable. The way that it's worded, we wouldn't actually be able to just store wood in that if we were then no longer had sheep. It's not enforceable. The wording is not precise, and looked at overall, it's then not reasonable. So we just have an issue with number 5.
Right, thank you very much. Do we have any questions, members? Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. If you switch the light off, thank you. Okay, so we have no parish or borough representatives lined up to speak. So questions for officers? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chairman. There's several references in the text to lack of privacy because of where this particular structure is going to be put. I've got no diagrams in here to show any related houses to where this barn is going that would even conflict, that would give us an idea of where the confliction would be on the impact on any residential dwelling. Do we have some indication of where that is in relation to the proposed structure?
We're just trying to get a plan for you to clarify. Councillors, I help with the red dot is roughly where the building would be in relation to Wayside Cottage to the southeast and then Plantation Cottage to the southwest.
Okay, thank you. That gives a rough idea of the proximity. Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Debate? Councillor Miller?
Listening to the applicants and reading through the officer's report, I grew up in the country, and this is a low-level barn. Other barns can be 2 stories high, but this is low-level. It's 3-bay garage. I have a 2-bay garage built in wood, sort of 2/3 the size of this, next to my house. So I've got a good idea of the size in relation to it. It's in an agricultural field. It is there for an agricultural purpose. I absolutely see no problem with this. It's not going to be occupied by anybody. People are going to be working there. It has been identified by the applicant to be appropriate to the kind of agricultural work they'll be doing in the field. I have no problem with this at all, and unless there's other people to have any other discussion on the committee, I'll propose it for approval, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Howell-Sorrell?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Councillor Court, do you have anything you wish to add?
No, Chair, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay. We have a proposal on the table, moved and seconded for the recommendation. All those in favour, please show. Okay. And those against? Abstentions? 1. Okay, that's carried. If we could have the decision.
The application is approved.
Okay, that brings us on to item 4, land adjoining Pamber Green Riding School. If we could have the officer presenting introduce the case.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a full planning application for the erection of 1 dwelling and associated works. Access for the dwelling would be through an existing field gate, whereby the development would be located on the western half of this field. The site has extensive planning history, whereby outline permissions have been granted for dwellings in this location. This is detailed on page 112 of the agenda, and there's a plan of the previous schemes on the presentation. In terms of an update, additional pre-commencement conditions have been added to provide a levels plan due to the change in ground levels of 0.5 metres, and a construction management plan has been added, which also includes the disposal of any soil from the site. It's also noted that the landscaping condition requires details of any retaining walls to be submitted, which is in condition 4, and the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions listed at the pages 129 to 134 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we don't have anyone lined up to speak against the application, but I do have Mr. Cobbold and Mr. Sears in support. If you'd like to make your way up.
Thank you, Chair. It will be mainly me. Mr. Sears is here just to answer questions, should you have any. Okay, this one, the outline really speaks volumes. It's the key here. It's the important consideration, the outline consent, which is extant at the moment. It's a wider site with the application you're going to be considering next. You can see the outline there. That's been approved with those positions of the houses there. So siting and means of access was covered by that application and approved there. Generally speaking, it's a strip, it's a linear residential area where there's a significant variation in the setback distances of the properties that you can see there on that plan. So there's no established building line as such here. The dwelling proposed here sits between the line of houses to the east and the completed house you can see on the left-hand side of your screen there. That was built in the last couple of years. It sits on the bend of New Road. And the proposed location would be set back from the frontage as per the outline consent. Designs of properties, again, they're varied along the road. There's no uniform form of design or style of building. Some are bungalows, some have loft, well, most of the bungalows, to be fair, have loft conversions now. Others are houses, and there are certainly some two-storey dwellings along there already. So we're going to follow the trend of trying to get the accommodation in the roof to reduce the overall ridge height. Just so you know, the outline permission itself didn't confirm the scale of the approved buildings, but there's absolutely no doubt on that application from the submitted floor areas that they would have been two-storey dwellings as well. So I agree that this dwelling would be in keeping with the area. A few third-party comments very quickly to address. Most of them, as we've touched on with previous applications, they question the principle of development rather than the site specific. So they've looked at the principle, highways, housing mix, traffic density, landscape, visual impact, all of those which really have already been considered at the previous stage of granting an outline permission on the site. So whilst that comparison, I suppose, it's inevitable, such comparisons only really useful as it gives us a positive perspective and a positive starting point. So across the site and the next, this will be 2 detached family dwellings, and there will be 2 stories in height. The proposed development will not, in my view, intensify the use of the site compared with the outline, and neither will it be materially different from the outline. So it's not here to consider the principle of residential on site. That's established. The decision's already been made on that. The design's good. I think it will relate well to the neighbouring property, and therefore I endorse the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the applicant agents? Okay, great. Thank you very much for your contribution. There are no parish councillors or ward councillors lined up to speak. So, questions for officers? Any questions for officers? Councillor Brown?
The outline permission was for 2 dwellings on the site, I believe. And this one I noticed is not SIL liable. If there have been if 2 applications had come forward together on this site, would it have been SIL liable?
Yes, it would. but they've come in as two separate applications, so there's a nil charge. If it was self-build as well, it wouldn't have been, but unless it was self-build, then they potentially could have got some exemptions, but it's come in as two separate applications, so we have to consider that as such.
Any further questions for officers? Debate? Councillor Rattigan?
Thank you, Chair. I think is well summed up by the fact that we've already given outline planning permission on them, frankly. And there is very little we can do as a borough council when it comes to SIL, has been already pointed out this evening. I think our job as councillors is to make sure that we don't provide loopholes for applicants in the future. But as it stands, I am happy to move the recommendation, as there's nothing else particular to say on that.
Councillor Miller, Councillor Faulkner and Councillor Durrant. Councillor Miller first.
Just to second the recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner? No? Same? Okay, right. We have a mover and seconder. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. Okay, so if we can have the decision.
Thank you, Chair. So that application is moved for approval as per the officer's report, subject to the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us on to item 5, the second house on land adjoining Pamber Green Riding School. So, Mr. Cobbold and Mr. Sears, have you got anything further you'd like to say on this one? Oh, sorry, no, on the officer presentation. No, getting ahead of myself.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a full application for the erection of the other dwelling and associated work. So access would also be through the same field gate shed as the adjacent site, whereby this development is on the eastern half of this field, to the east of the application we've just heard. The site, again, has extensive planning history. A dwelling in this location has previously been approved. In terms of an update, a revised surface water drainage drawing has been submitted which shows the correct location of the dwelling. This, however, has not altered the officer's assessment as set out in the officer's report, as we were aware that this amended plan was coming in. It's also further clarified that the changes to the site levels of 0.5 metres dropping down has not altered the officer's recommendation for refusal. The application in this instance recommended for refusal due to the proposal's overall size, bulk, positioning and relationship to the neighbour, but in terms of harming the character of the area in terms of the street scene rather than impact on the neighbour and its amenity. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Cole, Mr. Sears, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad you approved the last one, otherwise I'm not sure what I'd have said to you now, but we'll plough on. Just to clarify on the sill, it is a quirk of the system. This house is for Mr. Sears to live in. He wants it as a self-built house. The previous outline consent was not put forward as a proposal which includes self-build, and therefore we have to submit again the way your SIL officers deal with SIL exceptions. So just to clarify that, there's nothing underhand going on, etc. Right, so we've approved the one next door. I really think this one should be approved too. I say this because the refusal of this application would still result in the development of this piece of land. It would still result in a house being built. But what it would do is result in a house being built which doesn't align with the property you've just approved on the site next door. These two have been designed to fit in with each other, and that's the aim of the game, really. So I understand that the application is up for refusal, so I'm just going to deal with the issues which have come across in the committee report, and it seems to come down to the relationship with Waycroft to consider, with the refusal stating that the recommendation for refusal stating the proposed dwelling would harm and not positively contribute to the street scene. The main point here is that the building is not as far forward as it was shown on the outline permission. This is true. But by moving the building back by a couple of metres, and that's all it is, it's here, it means it can be moved further off the boundary with Waycroft compared with that outline permission there. I think this improves the relationship personally. The committee report goes on, it explains that the location further back was previously considered as unacceptable by officers. I wasn't the agent for the previous application. I don't know why that was agreed between the officers and the applicant at the time, but it was certainly not challenged, and I should think it was a means to an end to try and get a consent out of it. So I think that was just a compromise on behalf of the applicant. So Waycroft is set further forward, that's right. But it's also set well forward from the house that's already been approved, as you can see there. What we've tried to do is create a crescent around from that new house to the west of the site, through the one you've just approved, and then linking forward towards Waycroft. The report carries on. Size of the dwelling, including its height and overall bulk, is not considered to relate well to the neighbouring property to the east. That's Waycroft again. But I'll take you back again to this extant permission. Whilst the scale and appearance of that building wasn't for consideration, as I've said previously, it was going to be a two-storey house. Two-storey houses are seldom less than 8.5 height, which is what we're 8.5 metres, I should say, which is what we've got here. So the council has essentially already approved a house of this height as well. Again, most of the third-party objections, they go back to the principal arguments. So I think I'll just sum up by leaving with the question, what is the harm of this house compared with what's been approved already? And in light of what you've agreed next door and what the officers agreed next door was a well-designed, well-proportioned house. So it fits in with the neighbouring properties, and I don't think it results in any harm to the local area. You've got the conditions on the previous approval, which you've just given. I strongly suggest that you use those conditions again in approving this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions for the agent applicant? Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. So, any questions for officers? Councillor Mill.
I'm slightly confused, Chair. On page 171, is that the extent permission for two dwellings on this combined site?
So,
and we've just approved the house on the left on the site plan. Is that correct?
yeah, so the dwellings shown on page 171 on the eastern site is the indicative layout of the outline permission that's extant, not the current application. That's not the layout of the current one.
Okay, I accept that. Why weren't these two pulled together under that same outline? Why are we looking at the two separately? Because you were refusing one and approving the other? Is that the recommendation difference?
They were submitted as two separate full applications, so we've got to consider them separately. That's what it was submitted as. And they've shown on the block plan the extant permissions to give weight to their current applications, but obviously they've not shown the other one because it's not been determined yet. But yeah, so that's why they've been submitted like that, sorry. Just two separate applications. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Baum.
The one that we've just approved and this one, what's the difference in footprint?
I don't have those measurements to hand, but do we have to? If you got the previous, yeah, can you get that up? So that's the previous application that we've just accepted. And if we go back to, yeah. They were marked out on site when in the viewings, but they're broad. They're not massively significantly indifferent, but it's looking at the plot. In this instance, they've just felt this plot's slightly thinner. It's pushed back, so that was the officer's view. Thank you.
If I can just clarify, councillor, so if you go back to the previous one that you've approved, okay, just in general footprint terms, you've approved a house there that's 12.6 metres wide and 15 metres deep. And then the comparison on this one, if you look on page 146, at the top of 146, it's 13.7 wide and 16 metres deep. So it's bigger. That's just pure footprint.
Okay, just for future reference as well, you can ask questions like that of the agent because that's their design. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions of officers? Okay, debate. Councillor Held-Sorrell, Councillor Attigan, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I was on the site plan, I saw the layouts. I heard the concerns of the officers on the site visit, and I personally didn't feel they held any weight. It's one very oddly specific reason to refuse, and if anything, I think the movement compared to the outline of this building is an improvement on the outline. So I'm happy to have other people make an input, but if nobody else wants to move it for approval based on similar reasons to the previous one, then I will do so when required.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I've looked at this in probably a little bit more detail than I normally do, because Mr. Shield contacted me a little while ago because he thought it was in my ward. And I'd looked at various plans before I realised it wasn't in my ward. And I've seen several different options on this. He's moved it forward to bring it into line with the other houses and was told it was too close to the boundaries in the narrowest point of the site. He's moved it backwards and was told it was out of line. I must have seen about 6 different versions. And whichever way he went, it seemed to be a different objection. And I look at it and I really, really can't see the harm. The plot is plenty big enough. It's reasonably in keeping with everything around it. It's not significantly larger than the outline planning permission, so I really, really don't see what the problem is with it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Attigan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think the outline gave us the nod on this, and we are not building any more land within Basingstoke and Dean, although we're building more houses, and I think we need to use land well. There has to be the principle that we use land as efficiently as possible, and 2 homes within the larger plot, I think, make absolute sense. There is no street scene, there is no uniformity in the houses that are already built. 3 and 4 bedroom properties within the Pamber area are completely acceptable. If we look around, I drove down there this morning. I genuinely believe that we would be subjectively saying that bulk, size and scale and positioning. Now, they've moved it forward, they've moved it back. I think this is, in basic principles, we can subjectively say that this is allowable in front of us, and I'm happy to move the recommendation against the recommendation that we believe the size, scale and positioning and the relationships to other dwellings within the local area are acceptable to us as a committee, and therefore that's the recommendation I'd like to put to this committee.
Okay, do we have a seconder, Councillor Held-Sorrell? Anyone else wish to speak on this? Okay, so we have a move for approval against the recommendation. Do we need to cite, we've had the reasons cited, haven't we?
So we need reasons for approval.
Right, so if we could have the reasons for approval.
That the size, bulk and positioning of this site does not meet, that does not adversely contribute to an adverse effect on the street scene and would be acceptable in terms of visual impact to the wider street area. And obviously, having approved the last one, we need to be mindful of that on the outline, and therefore I believe we are not contrary to policies EM1 and EM10.
Okay, so essentially just turning it round on its head. Okay, and we have a seconder, Councillor House-Sorrell. So those being the reasons for the motion. Sorry?
Go through the conditions.
Yeah, can we go through the conditions?
Yeah, okay, so they're broadly similar to the previous application. So we've got, and subject to some of these being agreed by the agent, so we've got plans, time limit, materials to be submitted above slab, hard and soft landscaping details above slab, water efficiency prior to occupation, surface water drainage details to be in accordance with the submitted details, hours of construction, hours of delivery, provision of refuse and recycling storage, provision for parking and turning on site, cycle provision details to be submitted on occupation, visibility displays to be in accordance with the submitted details, any gates to be set back 5.5 metres, non-migratory access surface, minimum 6 metres, biodiversity enhancement and management plan, details to be submitted prior to commencement, the development to be in accordance with the ecological appraisal, then we've got removal of PD rights, that's classes AA and E, provision of electrical charging provision, which will be prior to occupation details. Then we've got arboricultural protection in accordance with the submitted details. Details of the services and utilities layout to be pre-commencement to in relation to trees as well. Then we've got removal, so we've got first floor window on the east elevation to be obscured, glazed with a high opening. Then we've got no additional windows on the first floor east and west elevations. Then we've got a levels condition to be submitted pre-commencement, and we've got a construction method statement which will also include the disposal of soil to be submitted prior to commencement.
Okay, so we've got the conditions, we've got the information required for a vote now. So if we move to vote, all those in favour of the motion on the table, please show. Okay, so that's unanimous. So if we could have the decision, please.
Thank you. So that application is approved, subject to the conditions just listed to you. Thank you.
Okay. Item 6, Cherry Cottage, Holdrop Hill, Headley. If the officers would like to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for permission in principle for 4 dwellings. The for minimum of 4 and maximum of 4. The application is to consider land use, location and amount of development only. All other matters are to be considered under a technical details consent application. An indicative layout has been provided which shows how 4 dwellings could be positioned within the site. In terms of an update, additional consultee comments have been received. The biodiversity officer has advised there's no objections subject to the submission of a preliminary ecological survey and a net gain assessment within the technical details consent application. This was already covered in informative 5 in the agenda. The Conservation Officer has also provided comments, raising objections to the lack of a heritage statement to appreciate the significance of Holdrop House and White Cottage, both Grade 2 listed. The heritage statement is listed as a required document to be submitted with the TDC application under informative 5. Whilst it's noted that the proposal for 4 dwellings would alter the character, The detail in relation to layout, appearance and design is a matter of technical details consent, and we have already approved some development here in the planning history. The Conservation Officer has also considered that the harm would be less than substantial at the lower end of the scale. So in this instance, we are of the opinion that a technical details consent application could come forward that would respect the significance of the building, and therefore the recommendation is still for approval. And that is subject to all subject to a technical details consent application and the required documents, which is on 191 and 192 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we don't have any objectors lined up to speak. In support, we have Mr. Leedale. Welcome to Development Control. Thank you for your patience. When you're ready, you've got 4 minutes if you push the right-hand button, and we'll start the timer when you speak.
Thank you, Chair. I represent the applicant, and I'm grateful to the committee for allowing me to speak and for taking the trouble to visit the site. As you can see from the report, the application seeks planning permission for, in principle, for 4 houses. This has been reduced from 6, and I agree. I think that was excessive, so we're now in a position where the recommendation is for the grant of planning in principle. You've got all the details of the housing land supply difficulty, and that this will add to the housing land supply which you require. On the heritage matter, I note the comments of your Conservation Officer, and those are matters which can properly be dealt with at technical detailed stage. I've nothing further to add, Chairman. The report is very thorough, and I think it's all said in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Leydale, I've got 3 plans in front of me, one on page 193, one on page 194, and one on page 195, and they're completely different. The red area on the plan on page 193 goes all the way up to Common Road, and a blue area immediately around Cherry Cottage. The plan shown on page 195, the red area doesn't go anywhere near Common Road and shows Cherry Cottage in a massive blue area. And if I look at the indicative layout on page 194, that shows parking for one of the dwellings as being almost touching Cherry Cottage, which is in the blue area on both the other plans. Which plan's right, which plan's wrong?
Thank you, Councillor. I think I think I'm right in saying the difficulty there is 2 of those plans refer to a live planning permission in principle for 1 dwelling, and the ones that you're looking at today are 194 and 193. Officers can confirm I've got that wrong, but 195 and 196 are the 2022 PIP, which is a live permission.
Okay, would you like to clarify that?
Sorry, that's really these are to the extent permissions that are in place. So it says at the top of the page, planning reference 22/01537/PIP. So they were the ones for the singular dwelling that has permission in principle already. So those are slightly different, that's why. And then the other plan is just indicative layout. Thank you.
Okay, does that clear things up? Any more questions? Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. We don't have any parish or council representatives, so questions for officers. Councillor Miller, Councillor Robinson.
Could I ask, thank you, Chairman. There is an extant PIP out for the site.
Yes, there's an extant
If
PIP.
this was approved, would that supersede that other PIP, or would the other PIP still be extant?
So So they've got permission in principle for one in the corner of the site. This is for 4. So it covers the same part of the same area, which is, if we can get the plan, so that's the 1. And if we go to the site area now for the 4, that's for the 4. They would have permission to build 1 and the 4, yes, but it's up to technical details consent at that stage. We would then consider any design that was coming forward.
So, sorry, get this clear. You could have multiple PIPs on the similar sites that overlap each other, so the applicants can just pick and choose which one they want to pick up.
Yes, it's like the outline of the previous application. You can have as many applications as you want to consider. We can't prevent anyone submitting an application.
I'll just endorse Councillor Robinson's view about PIPs. We're fed up with them because let's be straightforward in planning. This is creating confusion, to say the least.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still confused as to which plan is valid and which plan is not. And really do want to ask the question, why on earth have we got different plans? The plan with the indicative layout on page 194, is that a valid plan?
If I can just explain, we were trying to be helpful. Obviously, it's slightly backfired. The plan that's on the screen in front of you, that's what you're considering tonight.
Sorry, which one?
The one on the screen in front of you.
Wants to give context.
Right, so that is that is the one on page 193.
That is the only one that you are considering tonight.
Okay.
The other one that we put on there was just part of the history of the site to help you to understand that there had been a permission in principle for one dwelling in the top right-hand corner.
So why, if 193 is a valid plan, does the indicative layout show parking for this plan as being in the blue area, virtually touching Cherry Cottage, which isn't part of the application site at all? It doesn't agree. The plans are rubbish.
With regards to that plan there, that's purely indicative, and yes, I accept what you're saying, it's showing a parking
It indicates that half this planning application isn't in the application site. How on earth are we supposed to make a decision where we've got plans which do not correspond to the outline of the site?
It's on blue land, that's all it is. So, they can show that's indicatively where they would be putting parking. What's before you is just the 4 dwellings on the red line.
But they're not in the red line.
They're
in the blue line. They're in the blue line of Cherry Cottage.
The parking there is for the host dwelling, indicating the revised parking layout for the host dwelling, which they can do within the blue land, and we can control that by condition because it's their land.
I'll leave it there. You know what I think.
That's a matter for technical details consent.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've just seen that the planning system's rubbish, if I'm honest. So we were all on site, or most of us were on site on Friday. So what we're saying is, it is a large site, I have no problems with that. But you're saying to us, this site could accommodate 6 houses. No, because you've got Cherry Tree on its own, which is not going to change. You've got a planning permission in principle for 1 and now another 4. Is that how it stacks up?
Those 4 could come in as 4 flats. Those 4 could come in as 2 semi-detached dwellings. We're looking at the principle of 4 dwellings. And they provide us an indicative layout of how 4 could be addressed. We have no reason at this stage to recommend refusal. If at technical details consent stage a scheme came forward that we were not happy with, we could refuse that technical details consent.
Can I just add to that? You will not get this single pit plus the 4 being built on top of each other. Physically, it's impossible. They will either be able to implement the 4 if you choose to agree the one tonight and they get technical consent for that. Equally, they could, with this single unit, they could put a technical detailed consent in for that, and that could be approved. But you can't build the 2 together because you'd be building 1 house on top of each other. There are only 4 new dwellings that are for consideration tonight.
I accept that, and thank you for clarifying that. But I'm just making the point that that officers with discussions with the agent have already reduced the number on this site from 6 to 4, and now we're sort of approving 6 with an existing house. Okay, so you could reject it at the TDC stage on the basis that of bulk, size, scale, and impact. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect,
Or
then.
any other matters, impact, heritage, anything. So
Well, if
any matters that are part of the technical details.
Can I put a marker down? I'd like to call it to committee when it comes in for TDC. Thank you very much. As it's only about the location, land use, and the amount of development, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Councillor Howard Sorrell, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps my depth of experience is lacking, but I don't remember ever seeing an application that specifically says a minimum of and a maximum of the same number. Are there shenanigans afoot? Is that?
So the concept of PIPs are it's like outline, so you can do up to, not like, but it's similar in terms of you can put up to, but they've stipulated on this one it's 4 and 4, but it could be, if it was between 1 and 4, then we would be looking at between 1 and 4 dwellings. But in this instance, it's a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 4, so their intentions are 4.
Yes, so that's my question. So is the minimum of 4, can they then use that in future to say, oh, a minimum of 4 has already been approved. We also have the 1, so now we're coming back with a 5. No?
Well, we can't prevent them from putting in another application, but we've considered that 6 is not acceptable, and that's been amended through that. So they've amended it to a minimum of 4, a maximum of 4. This is what's before us now. We consider that 4 could reasonably, the principle of 4 is acceptable.
In which case, can I second?
Right, long last. Right, Councillor Freeman, you had your hand up.
Well, it's not really a question, it's more for debate, so I don't know whether it's relevant now or not.
I think we're in debate now. We've got a mover and a seconder, so yeah, speak now, please.
Thank you. Okay, well, seeing as it's debate, I'm not happy with it at all. I don't think that you can get 4 houses on there as like with this indicative layout. I don't think you can do that without significant damage to the heritage assets, and I think the access, the proposed new access point of straight out to the road there is extremely dangerous. Personally, I don't agree that you can fit 4 houses on there without substantial issues heritage-wise and access-wise. So, I think it should be refused, personally.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I will be voting against this because the plans are so totally misleading.
So we have a motion in favour of approval, duly seconded. I will now move to vote on that. Those in favour, please show. Six. Okay. Those against? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Casting vote, Chair.
Okay. Well, it's with reluctance that I vote twice in favour of the recommendation. Okay, if we can have the decision.
So the application is approved as per the officer's recommendation with the required details at the end of the report. Thank you.
Okay, there be no further items. Thank you very much for your attendance tonight, and I declare this meeting closed.
All-time record, 5 to 8.